Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA, you are entitled to reasonable accommodations. This video will provide you with information about requesting reasonable accommodations in the workplace.
A reasonable accommodation is a change in the workplace that allows you to do your job. Examples of accommodations include an employee with a back impairment asking for an orthopedic chair, an employee who is deaf requesting an American Sign Language interpreter for a staff meeting, an employee with depression asking for a flexible schedule to accommodate therapy appointments, or an employee who is blind asking for training materials in Braille.
Some people with disabilities do not need a reasonable accommodation, and others do. If you do not need an accommodation, it is your right to keep your disability private. However, if you think an accommodation is necessary for you to do your job, it is your responsibility to request one.
The ADA does not require you to make your request in writing or use the words reasonable accommodation. However, it is a good idea to do so your employer is clear about what you are requesting. Putting your request in writing is also important if there is later a dispute about your request. If your employer has a reasonable accommodation form, you should use it.
Your employer may request you consider a different accommodation for your disability, or your employer may ask for more information or medical documentation to understand your request and how it relates to your disability. It is important to respond to these inquiries, known as the interactive process. However, do not sign a general release of medical information, as that is more information than an employer is allowed. Remember that the law requires employers to provide a reasonable accommodation, not necessarily your preferred accommodation, so you should be open-minded and consider possible alternative accommodations that might work for you.
If you make a request for a reasonable accommodation, your employer is required to keep this request confidential and separate from your personnel file. That way, your coworkers will not know about your request or your disability if you want to keep this information private.